My grandmother's name trended for 72 hours. They called her a fraud, a thief, a manipulator of innocent girls. And I sat there, watching millions believe it, while the real criminals hosted champagne parties under her stolen name. I didn't cry. That would have been easier. Instead, I memorized everything. Every headline, every comment, every smiling face of the board members who pretended to be shocked. Because grief makes you emotional, but humiliation? That makes you precise. And precision is far more dangerous. The world knew them as the most elite modeling agency in Europe. Untouchable, curated, exclusive. I knew them as parasites. Because before it became their empire, it was hers, my grandmother's. She didn't build it with money. She built it with something much harder to fake: trust. Girls who had nothing. Girls who were used, discarded, ignored. She gave them contracts that protected them, not exploited them. No hidden clauses. No lifetime traps. No silent abuse disguised as opportunity. And that was her biggest mistake. Because kindness doesn't survive long in an industry built on control. The headlines in 2024 were clean. Too clean. Founder accused of financial misconduct. Luxury agency linked to fraud scheme. Dark truth behind iconic fashion legacy. But what they didn't show was how quickly the board replaced her. No investigation. No hesitation. Just signatures. Transfers. Ownership shifts that happened overnight. And suddenly, my grandmother wasn't a founder anymore. She was a scandal. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, machines breathing for her. Her hands cold, fragile, but still holding mine like she was afraid I'd disappear too. They took it, she whispered. Not they ruined me. Not they lied. They took it. That's when I understood. This wasn't about reputation. It was theft. I nodded slowly. I'll get it back. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just looked at me, like she already knew what that promise would cost. And then she said something I didn't understand at the time. Don't fight them directly. Pause. Make them expose themselves. I didn't ask how. Because I already knew that kind of revenge isn't loud. It's patient. So I disappeared. No public statements. No emotional breakdowns. No interviews defending her name. Silence. The kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable. Because when you don't react, they don't know how to control the narrative. I changed my last name. Subtly. Legally. Not enough to erase my identity. Just enough to step into their world unnoticed. Then I applied. Not as a model. As an intern. The irony made me smile the day they accepted me. Because the same agency that destroyed my family was now onboarding me into their system. I learned fast. Not because I was talented, but because I was obsessed. Contracts. Financial structures. Internal communications. Everything. And what I found was worse than anything the headlines ever suggested. The elite contracts? Traps. Hidden clauses that locked girls into 10-year agreements. Penalties so high they could never leave. Image rights signed away permanently. Medical decisions controlled by the agency. And the worst part? Everything was technically legal. Because the language was designed to confuse, not protect. I didn't confront anyone. I smiled. I observed. I became invisible. Because invisible people hear everything. One night, I found it, buried in an archive no one bothered to organize. Physical letters. Handwritten. My grandmother's. Her original agreements. Her notes. Her vision. Pages and pages of something the agency no longer represented. Ethics. And attached to those letters were copies of the first ownership documents. Proof. Clear. Undeniable. She didn't lose the agency. It was taken. Through manipulated signatures. Through legal pressure during her illness. Through people she trusted. I didn't react. I photographed everything. Carefully. Systematically. Because truth alone doesn't destroy people. Timing does. Months passed. I moved up. Intern to assistant. Assistant to junior coordinator. Each promotion wasn't luck. It was design. I solved problems no one else noticed. Fixed mistakes before they became visible. I made myself useful. And useful people get access. Eventually, I got close to the board. Close enough to sit in meetings. Close enough to hear the real conversations. And that's when I met him. The CEO. Calm. Polished. Untouchable. The kind of man who never raises his voice because he doesn't need to. People adjust themselves around him. I watched him closely. Not for what he said. For what he didn't. Because power isn't in statements. It's in omissions. One evening, he asked me a question. Why did you choose this industry? Simple. Harmless. But I knew better. This was a test. So I smiled. I like systems. Pause. Especially broken ones. He studied me for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded. That was the moment he stopped seeing me as staff and started seeing me as interesting. Weeks later, I was offered a position no one at my level should have access to. Strategic operations, which is a beautiful way of saying I now had visibility into everything. Financial flows. Investor relations, ownership structures, everything they used to hide. And that's when I found the final piece. A quiet acquisition deal. The agency was struggling. Not publicly. Never publicly. But internally, they were bleeding. Bad investments. Legal settlements quietly buried. And one desperate solution. They were looking for a buyer. But not just anyone. Someone discreet. Someone powerful. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. I smiled when I read that. Because they weren't looking for a savior. They were looking for silence. And I was about to give them exactly that. 3 months later, a private investment group made an offer. Clean. Fast. Irresistible. They accepted within 48 hours. No negotiation. No hesitation. Because desperation makes people careless. And no one thought to look deeper into the ownership of that group. No one asked who was behind it. Because I made sure there was nothing obvious to find. Layered identities. Legal shields. Silent partners. But at the very center was me, the granddaughter of the woman they erased. The girl who sat silently while they destroyed her family name. Now holding every share, every contract, every secret. And they didn't even realize it. Not yet. The day the transfer finalized, I didn't celebrate. I dressed simply. Walked into the building like I always did. Same elevator. Same hallway. But this time, when I entered the boardroom, They stood up, not out of respect, out of confusion, because I wasn't supposed to be there, not at that seat, not at the head of the table. I placed the documents down, slowly, watched their faces shift. Recognition, disbelief, fear, all unfolding in real time. I assume you've read the acquisition details, I said calmly. Silence. Because they had. They just never imagined who they were agreeing to. I leaned back slightly, relaxed, controlled. The agency is no longer yours. Pause. It's mine. And just like that, everything they built on lies became mine to dismantle. But I didn't rush, because destruction is easy. Control is art. And I hadn't even started yet. One of them finally spoke. You don't understand what you're walking into. I smiled. Soft. Measured. No, I said quietly. You don't understand what you've been standing on. I opened a folder and slid a single letter across the table. My grandmother's handwriting. Original. Unfiltered. Proof of everything. Their hands trembled as they read, because in that moment, they realized something terrifying. I didn't just take their company. I took their narrative. And without narrative, power collapses. But just as the silence deepened, one of them laughed. Not nervous. Confident. Do you really think this is enough? He said. I tilted my head slightly, because that reaction wasn't denial. It was certainty. And that's when I felt it. That subtle shift in the room. The kind you only notice when you've spent months reading people. They weren't trapped. Not yet. Because they still had something. Something I hadn't seen. Something they were waiting to use. And for the first time since I walked in, I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. The man who laughed didn't look nervous. That's how I knew I had missed something. Not a detail. A layer. And in rooms like this, layers are where people hide their real weapons. I didn't interrupt him, didn't challenge him. Because when someone is confident, the smartest thing you can do is give them space to prove why. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed. You've acquired shares, he said calmly. Impressive. A few of the others nodded, not out of agreement, but relief. Like they had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. But ownership, he continued, isn't the same as control. There it was. Not a threat. A clarification. I folded my hands on the table. And what exactly am I missing? I asked softly. He smiled. Not wide. Not arrogant. Certain. You bought the body. Pause. Not the nervous system. Silence spread again. Because now, even the ones who were panicking before started to breathe easier. I let that sit. Let them believe it. Because belief makes people careless. He tapped the table once. Every senior contract, every international partner, every face that actually brings value to this agency, he leaned forward slightly, is tied to us. Not the company. And without those relationships, he finished, you're holding an empty shell. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed. Because I had expected this. Just not from him. From someone weaker. But that made it better. Because confident people fall harder. I see, I said quietly. Then I reached into my folder again. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to shift attention. Because timing isn't about speed, it's about control. I placed a second document on the table. Thicker, heavier. Then you'll find this interesting. No one moved at first, until the CEO reached for it. His fingers steady, but his eyes already scanning ahead, reading faster than normal. That's always the tell. When someone speeds up, it means they're looking for something specific. And when they find it, their body reacts before their mind can hide it. His jaw tightened, just slightly. There it was again. The crack. This isn't possible, one of the women whispered. But it was. Because over the past 3 months, while they were preparing to sell, I was rewriting everything they thought they controlled. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. You see, I said, my voice calm, while you were negotiating the sale. Pause. I was reviewing your contracts. I looked around the room. Not rushing. Because the slower you speak, the heavier your words feel. And I noticed something interesting. I leaned forward slightly. Most of your loyal talent, pause, never actually signed with you. Confusion flickered. Because that didn't make sense. Until it did. They signed with subsidiary management firms. I continued, which you controlled. Their eyes shifted, connecting it. Finally. And those firms, I said softly, no longer belong to you. Silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was collapsing. Because they understood now. Ownership wasn't just about the main agency. It was about the web around it. The structure they built to protect themselves was now mine. Every contract, every clause, every hidden dependency. Transferred. Signed. Locked. The man who laughed earlier didn't smile anymore. He flipped through the pages faster now. Desperate. Looking for a loophole. But I had already closed them. Weeks ago. Before they even realized they needed them. That's illegal, someone said. I tilted my head. Read page 14. They did. And then came the silence I had been waiting for. Because page 14 was their own language, their own structure, used against them, perfectly compliant, perfectly binding. I sat back, calm, unbothered, because the loudest victories are always silent. You don't have leverage anymore, I said softly. No anger, no satisfaction, just truth. And truth, delivered without emotion, is impossible to argue with. The CEO closed the file slowly, carefully, like it might explode if he moved too fast. Then he looked at me, really looked, not as an employee, not as an inconvenience, but as something else, a threat. Who are you? He asked quietly. Not rhetorically, genuinely, because he knew now this wasn't luck. This was design. I held his gaze long enough to make the answer feel heavier than it was. Then I said it. My grandmother, pause, built this agency. Recognition hit him instantly. Not because he remembered her, because he remembered what they did to her. And in that moment, the entire room shifted again. Not confusion, not panic. Fear. Pure. Measured. Because they understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't business. This was personal. And personal doesn't negotiate. One of them stood up abruptly. "You think this ends here?" he snapped. I didn't flinch. Because volume is usually the last defense of someone losing control. "It doesn't end," I said calmly. "It evolves." I reached for one final folder. Smaller, but far more dangerous. This, I placed it in the center of the table, is your internal misconduct archive. No one touched it. No one needed to, because they already knew what was inside. Complaints, settlements, silenced cases. Everything they buried to protect their image. I haven't released it, I continued. Not yet. That word hung in the air, because now they understood the real shift. I didn't just have control. I had timing, and timing is power. "What do you want?" the CEO asked. Finally, the question that matters. I smiled. Not wide, not emotional. Precise. Nothing you can negotiate. I let the silence stretch, then added quietly, "I want correction." They frowned, confused, because they expected money, power, revenge. Not that. Public correction, I clarified. I leaned forward slightly. Every lie you told about her, pause, you will undo. And every system you built to exploit people. I let my eyes move across each of them. You will dismantle. A scoff, a shake of the head. "You're naive," someone said. I didn't respond, because arguing would lower me to their level. Instead, I opened the folder. Just slightly. Enough for them to see a single page. Names, dates, amounts, and one signature that shouldn't have been there. The CEO's. His breath caught. Barely. But enough. Because now he understood something even the others didn't yet. This wasn't just exposure. This was precision targeting. "You won't survive this either," he said quietly. Not a threat. A statement. I nodded. I know. That answer unsettled him more than anything else. Because fearless people are unpredictable. And unpredictable is uncontrollable. The room fell into silence again. Long, heavy, then slowly, one by one, they sat down. Not defeated, but recalculating. Because now, it wasn't about stopping me. It was about surviving me. And just as I thought I had finally shifted the entire board, the CEO did something unexpected. He smiled. Not forced. Not defensive. Genuine. "You really are her granddaughter," he said softly. Then he leaned back, relaxed again. "And you've done something remarkable." I didn't react, because praise from people like him is never free. "But you made one mistake." There it was. I stayed still. Tell me, I said quietly. He looked directly at me. You assumed we were the villains of this story. A pause. And we are, he admitted. But we're not the only ones. The room shifted again. Not in fear, in anticipation. Because now they were waiting, watching him. And for the first time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not doubt, but curiosity. Because his tone wasn't offensive. It was revealing. He tapped the table once. Do you know who actually started the investigation against your grandmother? My fingers didn't move. My expression didn't change. But inside, something tightened. Because I knew the answer. Or, at least, I thought I did. The board, I said calmly. He smiled slightly. No. A pause. Long enough to matter. Your grandmother did. Silence. But this time, it didn't collapse. It fractured. Because that didn't make sense. It couldn't. And yet, the way he said it felt like truth. Not manipulation. Something worse. Something real. I didn't speak. Because speaking too fast would give him control. Instead, I waited. And he let the silence build. Because now, he had the advantage. And he knew it. There's something in those letters you found, he said softly. Something you didn't understand. My heartbeat slowed. Deliberately. Because emotion is where mistakes happen. What are you talking about? I asked. Calm. Controlled. He leaned forward. Read the last one again. A pause. Carefully. And just like that, the foundation I had built my entire plan on shifted. Not shattered, but moved. Enough to be dangerous. Because if he was right, then this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was something else. Something I hadn't prepared for. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I realized I might not be the only one who had been planning. From the very beginning, I didn't go back to the office that night. I went somewhere quieter. Somewhere that didn't belong to them. Didn't belong to the past. My grandmother's house. It still smelled the same. Old wood soft perfume, something warm and fading. The kind of place that remembers things, even when people try to forget. I didn't turn on all the lights, just one. Because clarity doesn't need brightness, it needs focus. I sat at her desk. The letters were already there, exactly where I had left them. Untouched. Because I thought I had already understood them. But now, I knew better. I picked up the last one. The paper felt thinner than I remembered. Or maybe my hands were heavier. I didn't rush. Because rushing now would mean I was afraid. And I refused to give that feeling a place to grow. So I read it again, slowly. Not for meaning, for intention. Her handwriting was steady, deliberate. But there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. A hesitation. Not in the words, but in the spaces between them. I leaned closer, and then I saw it. Indentations. Faint. Almost invisible. Like she had written something, then removed it. My breath slowed. Because that wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. I reached for a pencil, turned it sideways, and gently shaded over the page. The marks appeared slowly, like a ghost, refusing to stay buried. Words, different from the ones written in ink, hidden beneath them. And as they became clearer, something inside me shifted. Not panic. Recognition. Trust no one inside the board. My fingers tightened slightly, especially not the one who offers protection. Protection. My mind moved instantly. Back to the hospital. Back to her voice. They took it. Not we lost it. They. I kept reading. I started the audit myself. The room felt smaller, like the walls had moved closer without asking. I needed proof before they could silence me. Silence. That word again. If anything happens to me, pause. It will not be because I was weak. My chest tightened, just slightly. Not from pain. From understanding. It will be because I trusted the wrong person. I stopped. Because that sentence wasn't a warning. It was a confession. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew was incomplete. I leaned back slowly, the letter still in my hand. Because if she started the investigation, then the headlines weren't entirely false. They were redirected, twisted, used. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape, to reorganize. Because this changed one thing. The beginning, not the end. She was exposing them, and they finished the story. I exhaled quietly, then reached for my phone. Opened the archive I had built. Months of recordings, documents, internal messages, all organized, all ready. But now, I wasn't looking for confirmation. I was looking for contradiction. And it didn't take long. One file, buried deeper than the others. A private communication thread, encrypted, between board members. I had skimmed it before, dismissed it, because at the time, it didn't fit my narrative. But now, I read it differently. She's getting too close. We need to accelerate the transition. Legal pressure won't be enough anymore. And then, one message. Short. Cold. I'll handle her. No name. No signature. Just that. But the timestamp matched the week she collapsed. My jaw tightened. Because that wasn't coincidence. That was sequence. And suddenly, the CEO's words echoed again. You assumed we were the villains. My fingers tapped the screen once, pulling up another file. A financial ledger. Clean. Organized. Too clean. Because real systems always leave noise. But this one felt curated, edited, controlled. I zoomed in, looked closer, and there it was. A pattern. Small transfers. Repeated. To one account. Consistent. invisible unless you were looking for it. I wasn't. Until now. I traced it back. Layer by layer. Shell accounts. Legal buffers. Then finally, a name. Not public. Not listed anywhere official. But I knew it. Because I had seen it once before. On a document I wasn't supposed to notice. My heartbeat stayed steady. Because panic would slow me down. And I needed speed now. Not physical speed. Mental. Clarity. Because something bigger was forming. And I was only seeing parts of it. I stood up. Walked to the window. The city lights stretched endlessly. Beautiful. Indifferent. Just like power. It doesn't care who holds it. Only who understands it. And in that moment, I realized something uncomfortable. I had taken control of the agency. But I hadn't taken control of the truth. Not completely. And partial truth is the most dangerous kind because it gives you confidence without protection. My phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, then opened it. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single line. You finally read it properly. My grip tightened. Because that wasn't a guess. That was confirmation. Someone knew. Not just what I had found, but when I found it. Which meant I wasn't the only one watching. I typed nothing. Didn't respond. Because engagement is how they map you. Instead, I waited. And seconds later, another message appeared. You're asking the wrong question. I exhaled slowly. Still calm. Still controlled. But now, alert. Because whoever this was, wasn't trying to threaten me. They were guiding me, which is far more dangerous. What should I be asking? I typed. 3 dots appeared instantly. No hesitation. Which meant they were waiting. Prepared. Then the reply came. Why did she keep it running? Pause. If she knew what they were doing? I stared at the screen. Because that question cut deeper than anything else. Not who betrayed her. Not how. But why she stayed. Why she allowed it to continue. And suddenly, my entire perception shifted again. Because if she knew, and didn't stop it immediately, then she wasn't just a victim. She was playing something longer. Something bigger. And I had just stepped into it. Without seeing the full board. I looked back at the letter. At the hidden words. At the spaces she left behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was finishing her story. I felt like I had just activated it. My phone vibrated again. Final message. You're not her revenge. Pause. You're her contingency. Silence filled the room. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. Because that meant one thing. Everything I thought I chose might have already been chosen for me. And if that was true, then the real question wasn't who I was fighting. It was who had been guiding me all along. I slowly closed my eyes. Not in fear. In focus. Because now, this wasn't just about reclaiming a name. It wasn't even about exposing them. This was something deeper, a design that started long before I ever stepped into that building. And I was only now beginning to see its edges. I didn't sleep, not because I was restless, but because sleep would have slowed me down. And I couldn't afford that anymore. Not after that message. "You're her contingency." That sentence stayed with me. Not as fear, as structure. Because if I was a contingency, that meant she expected failure, or interruption, or betrayal so deep it required a second version of her plan. And I had just stepped into it without realizing. I went back to the office before sunrise. Same building, same glass walls, same controlled elegance. But it felt different now. Not because it changed, but because I did. Perception reshapes reality faster than truth ever can. The reception staff greeted me the same way. Polite, neutral. They had no idea. That's the thing about power. The higher it is, the quieter it moves. I didn't go to my office. I went straight to the archive floor. Restricted. Or, at least, it used to be. Now my access cleared every lock without hesitation. Doors opened before I even touched them. That subtle shift never gets old. I walked down the long corridor. Rows of secured storage. Digital. Physical. Most people would start with data. I didn't. Because digital systems can be rewritten. Physical records? They remember everything. I found what I was looking for faster than expected. Not because it was labeled clearly, but because I knew how she thought. Patterns, redundancies, hidden order. A box. Unremarkable. That's how the most important things are always stored. I opened it slowly. Inside, files. Old. Original. Not copies. The real versions. I flipped through them carefully. And then I saw it. A contract. Dated years before everything collapsed. Signed by my grandmother and one other person. Not a board member. Not an investor. Something else. An external advisor. The name made my chest tighten. Not because I recognized it immediately, but because I remembered where I had seen it. The account. The transfers. The hidden flow of money I traced last night. It all connected. Too cleanly. Too precisely. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. I sat down. The file open in front of me. Because now I had two versions of reality. The one I believed. And the one she left behind. And they weren't identical, which meant one of them was incomplete, or worse, intentionally misleading. I turned the page. More signatures, more clauses. But this contract was different. Not exploitative. Protective. It outlined something specific. A contingency structure. In case of internal compromise. That phrase echoed louder than anything else. Internal, not external threats, not competitors. Inside. She knew, long before the headlines, long before the collapse. She knew something was wrong. And instead of shutting it down immediately, she built something underneath it. Something hidden. something that could survive, even if the agency itself was taken. My fingers moved faster now. Not rushed. Focused. I followed the structure, layer by layer. And then I saw it. A clause. Simple. Buried. Easy to ignore. Unless you knew what to look for. Final authority transfers upon activation. Activation. That word again. My heartbeat stayed calm. But my thoughts accelerated. Because activation implies timing. A trigger. A moment when everything shifts. And suddenly, the acquisition didn't feel like my move anymore. It felt like the moment she had been preparing for. I leaned back slightly, letting it settle, because reacting too fast would blur the edges. And I needed clarity now, not emotion. The door behind me clicked. Soft, but intentional. I didn't turn immediately, because whoever walked in wanted me to react. And I don't give reactions for free. Impressive, a voice said. Calm, measured, familiar. I closed the file slowly, then turned. The CEO, standing in the doorway. Not surprised. Not angry. Just present. You found it faster than I expected, he continued. I stood up. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Equal. You knew I would, I said quietly. He smiled slightly. Yes. No denial. No performance. Just truth. Which made him more dangerous. Because honest people, who have nothing to lose, are unpredictable. Why are you here? I asked. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, not locking it, just enough to remove distractions. Because you're close, he said. A pause. But not close enough. I tilted my head slightly. Then explain. He walked toward the table. Slow. Controlled. Like someone who knows exactly how much space he owns. You think your grandmother was trying to destroy us. I didn't respond. Because that wasn't entirely true anymore. Wrong direction, he said softly. She was trying to contain something. Contain. That word shifted everything. Because containment isn't about revenge. It's about control. What? I asked. He looked at the file. Then back at me. Us at first. A pause. Then something bigger. My expression didn't change. But internally, every piece started moving. Because bigger means structure. Network. Not just individuals. You're being vague, I said calmly. He nodded. I have to be. Of course he did. Because full truth is never given at once. It's revealed in layers. Just like lies. But I can tell you this, he added. She wasn't protecting the agency. A pause. She was protecting what the agency was connected to. Connected. My mind went back instantly. The transfers. The hidden accounts. The external advisor. Everything that didn't belong to the surface. What is it connected to? I asked. He held my gaze. Long enough to measure something. Then he said it. Power that doesn't show its face. Silence. Because that wasn't an answer. It was a direction. And directions can be more dangerous than answers. Convenient, I said softly. He smiled again. You think I'm lying? I think you're selective. A pause. Same difference. For a second, neither of us spoke. Because this wasn't a confrontation. It was alignment. Temporary. Fragile. You weren't supposed to take control this early, he said finally. I didn't react. Because that confirmed something. Timing. I had moved faster than expected. Which meant I disrupted something. Then what was I supposed to do? I asked. He stepped closer. Observe longer. A pause. Understand deeper. His voice lowered slightly. Now you've forced movement. Movement. That word hit differently. Because movement means response. From people I hadn't even seen yet. Good, I said quietly. He studied me, trying to read something, but I gave him nothing. Because unpredictability is leverage. You really don't understand what's coming, he said. I understand enough, I replied. Then let me make it simple. He leaned slightly closer. Not threatening. Just precise. You didn't take control of a company. Pause. You stepped into a system. A long silence followed. Because that sentence wasn't meant to scare me. It was meant to prepare me. And preparation means something is already in motion. My phone vibrated again. Both of us noticed. I didn't look at it immediately. Because attention is power. But after a second, I picked it up. Another unknown message. I opened it. A single line. They know. My grip didn't change. My face didn't move. But something inside shifted. Because that message wasn't from him. Which meant there was someone else. Still watching. Still ahead. I looked back at the CEO. He saw it. Not the message. The shift. And for the first time, his expression changed. Just slightly. Because now, he realized something. He wasn't the only one trying to guide me. And neither was my grandmother. Which meant there was another player on the board. One we hadn't accounted for. And unlike the others, this one didn't need contracts. Didn't need ownership. Didn't need permission. Only timing. And they had just announced they were ready to move. I didn't respond to the message. Not because I didn't want to, but because whoever sent it didn't need a reply. They know. That wasn't communication. That was positioning. I locked my phone, placed it face down. Because the moment you show urgency, you lose control. The CEO was still watching me. Carefully. Measuring. Something changed, he said quietly. I didn't deny it, but I didn't confirm it either. Then we're both catching up, I replied. A faint smile. Not friendly. Respectful. Because now he understood something clearly. He wasn't ahead anymore. Neither of us were. Which meant we were both reacting. And reaction is where mistakes are born. I closed the file in front of me. Not because I was done, but because I had what I needed for now. You said I moved too early, I said calmly. He nodded. I did. Then tell me. Pause. What did I interrupt? Silence. Not hesitation. Calculation. Because answering that question
would cost him something.
And people like him never pay full price. A transfer, he said finally.
Vague.
On purpose. Of what? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked past me, stopped beside the archive shelves, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. Influence, he said. That word landed heavier than money ever could, because influence moves things money can't. From who to who? I pressed. He turned slightly. From us?
Pause. To them. Them.
There it was again. That invisible presence. The one behind the accounts. The one behind the structure. The one my grandmother was trying to contain. Why? I asked. This time, he didn't soften it. Because we lost control.
Simple. Clean. Terrifying.
Because people like them don't admit loss easily. Which meant, whatever they were, was bigger than the board. Bigger than the agency. Bigger than everything I had prepared for. And now? I asked. He met my eyes. Now.
Pause.
They don't need us anymore. Silence. But this time, it didn't feel like tension. It felt like exposure. Because suddenly, the board members I thought were predators looked like something else. Intermediaries. Used. Disposable. Just like the girls they signed. The symmetry almost made me smile. Almost. My phone vibrated again. This time, I didn't wait. I picked it up instantly. Because patterns matter. And 3 messages means intention. I opened it. A photo. Grainy. Low light. But clear enough. A meeting room. Not this building. Somewhere else. And inside it, 3 people. One of them I recognized instantly. The external advisor. The name from the contract.
The account.
The shadow behind everything. My pulse stayed steady. Because recognition is power. The second person
blurred.
Not by accident. Intentionally obscured. But the third made something cold settle in my chest. Because I knew that face. Not from here. Not from the agency. From somewhere older. Something I hadn't thought about in years. A memory I didn't realize was connected. I didn't show it. Didn't react.
But the CEO saw something.
A flicker. Barely there. What is it? He asked. I locked the screen again. Confirmation, I said quietly. He frowned slightly. Because that wasn't enough. But it was all he was getting.
For now.
I walked toward the door. Because standing still was no longer an option. Where are you going? He asked. I paused. Just enough to make the answer feel deliberate. To finish what she started. Then I opened the door. And left. The hallway felt different. Not physically. But mentally. Because now, every step had direction. Not reaction. I moved quickly. Not rushed. focused, because I needed to confirm something. Not through files, not through contracts, through memory. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the lowest level, the one no one uses anymore, because people forget things when they stop being useful. But forgotten places are where truth hides best. The doors open slowly. Dim lighting, quiet air, storage, old operations, and one room I hadn't entered since my first week. Back when I was still invisible. Back when I didn't understand what I was seeing. I walked inside. The space hadn't changed.
Dust.
Boxes, old equipment, and a single wall covered in archived photos. Events, campaigns, private gatherings. I moved closer.
Scanning. Not randomly.
Looking for something specific. A face. And then I found it. My breath slowed, because there it was.
Clear.
Unedited. The same man from the photo, standing beside my grandmother, smiling, not as an advisor, as something closer.
Trusted.
My fingers hovered over the image, not touching, because touching it would make it real, and I needed one more second before that happened, because if this connection was real, then everything changed again. Not the structure, not the system, the betrayal. Because this wasn't just inside the board. This went deeper, older, more personal. And suddenly, my grandmother's final words made terrifying sense. It will be because I trusted the wrong person. I exhaled slowly. Then finally, I touched the photo. And as I did, a voice behind me spoke. You're finally looking in the right direction. I didn't turn immediately, because I already knew this moment was going to change everything. I didn't turn around. Not immediately. Because voices like that don't belong to accidents. They belong to timing. And timing means intention. My fingers were still resting lightly on the photograph. My grandmother and the man beside her. Smiling. Trusting. I let that image settle one last time. Then I spoke. You've been watching me for a while. Not a question. A statement. Because the message, the photo, the timing, none of it was coincidence. A soft exhale behind me. Not surprised. Long enough, the voice replied.
Calm.
Measured. Familiar in a way that didn't feel comfortable. I turned slowly, because fast reactions give people power, and I don't hand that over. When I faced him, everything aligned. The third man from the photo. Not older. Not weaker. Just unchanged. Like time didn't touch him the way it touches everyone else. He studied me the same way I studied him. No rush. No emotion. Just assessment. You look like her, he said quietly. I didn't respond. Because that wasn't a compliment. It was a measurement. And you think like her too, he added. A pause. That's why you're still alive. There it was. The truth. Slipped in without decoration. My expression didn't move. But inside, everything sharpened. You sent the messages, I said. He nodded once. No denial. Of course not. People like him don't hide when they don't need to. Why? I asked. He stepped closer. Not threatening, just closing distance. Because you are about to make the same mistake she did. My fingers dropped from the photograph.
Slowly.
Trusting the wrong layer, he continued. Layer. That word again. Everything in this world was built on layers, and I had been peeling them back, one by one. But clearly, I hadn't reached the core yet. You were part of it, I said calmly. Not accusing. Stating. He smiled slightly. Part of what? I held his gaze. The structure she was trying to expose. A longer silence this time, because now we were past observation. This was confrontation, but still controlled. Not expose, he corrected softly. Stabilize. That word shifted something again, because stabilization isn't about destruction. It's about balance. And you? I asked. Which side are you on? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked past me, stopped in front of the photograph, looked at it for longer than necessary. She asked me the same question, he said quietly. My chest tightened, just slightly. When? I asked. Before everything broke. A pause. She already knew. Of course she did. That part wasn't surprising anymore. What did you tell her? I asked. He turned his head slightly. Just enough to look at me. I told her the truth. And what's that? His expression didn't change. There are no sides. Silence. Because that answer was either wisdom or manipulation. And the difference between the two is usually revealed too late. This system, I said slowly. What is it really? He exhaled. Not tired. Measured. Influence networks, he said. Agencies like this one, finance groups, political connections, media leverage. Each word landed carefully. All tied together. A pause. Not illegal. Of course. It's never illegal when it's designed properly. I didn't interrupt, because I needed him to keep talking. Your grandmother built something clean, he continued. Transparent. Ethical. A faint smile. And that made it valuable. Valuable.
Of course it did.
Because clean systems are perfect entry points for dirty ones. They didn't destroy her, he said. They integrated into her. That sentence hit differently, because it reframed everything. Not attack. Infiltration. And when she realized, I asked. He looked back at the photo. She adapted.
Of course she did.
She started mapping it, he added. Documenting connections. Following money. Identifying leverage points. My mind moved quickly. The letters, the hidden words, the contracts. Everything lined up. She was building a counterstructure, he said. A way to contain it without collapsing everything. Containment again. Always containment. Why not expose it? I asked. His answer came immediately. because exposure would destroy more than it fixes. I believed that. Not emotionally. Logically. Because systems like that don't collapse cleanly. They take everything down with them, including people who don't deserve it. She chose control over chaos, he said. And they couldn't allow that.
They,
I repeated. This time, he didn't avoid it. The ones above the board. My pulse stayed steady. Because now, I was hearing it directly.
no more guessing.
No more fragments. They don't like variables, he continued. And your grandmother, pause, became one. Silence.
Heavy.
Because now, the picture was complete. Almost. And me? I asked.
He turned fully this time.
Studied me again. You weren't supposed to activate yet. That again. Activation. You keep saying that, I said. Because it matters. A step closer. Your acquisition, your exposure, your pressure on the board. He shook his head slightly. You force the system to accelerate, and that's bad, I asked. He held my gaze. It's dangerous. A pause. Because now they'll respond directly.
Directly.
That word felt heavier than anything else he'd said. Because everything so far had been indirect, hidden, layered, controlled. Direct response means visibility, and visibility means escalation. My phone vibrated again. Both of us looked at it. I didn't hesitate this time. I opened it. A live location.
Pinned.
With a single message. Meeting moved. Now. My eyes narrowed slightly. Because that wasn't random. That was immediate. Urgent. And whoever sent it expected me to understand. I looked back at him. He already knew. Of course he did. They're not waiting anymore, he said quietly. A pause. They're adjusting. I slipped my phone into my pocket. Decision already forming. Good, I said. He frowned slightly. Because that wasn't the reaction he expected. I don't like being studied from a distance. A small silence. Then I added, I prefer when they come closer. For the first time, he smiled. Not amused. Impressed. You really are her contingency, he said. I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure anymore. If that was a compliment or a warning. I turned toward the exit, because standing still was no longer an option. But just before I reached the door,
He spoke again.
one more thing.
I paused.
Not turning. Be careful who you think you're becoming. A silence. Then, you might already be exactly what she was trying to stop. That sentence didn't hit immediately. It sank slowly, like something that needed time to become dangerous. I didn't reply, because some words don't deserve instant reactions. They deserve observation. And I walked out, because now I wasn't just following her path. I was about to collide with something she never finished. And whatever was waiting at that location wasn't part of my plan. It was part of theirs. I didn't take my car. Predictable routes. Our invitations. Instead, I walked out the back exit, blended into a street that didn't remember faces. The location pinned on my phone was across the city. Industrial. Quiet. The kind of place where decisions happen without witnesses. I changed direction twice. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to know if I was being followed. No one obvious. Which meant one of two things. Either I wasn't important enough yet, or they were better than I expected. Both options were useful. By the time I reached the building, the sun had already started to drop. Long shadows. Soft light. Everything looked calm.
Too calm.
I stopped across the street. Didn't go in immediately. Because walking straight into a controlled environment without reading it first is how people lose control. 3 entrances. Front, too obvious. Side,
Locked.
back, unsecured. Of course it was. I smiled slightly, because people like them love the illusion of openness. I walked around slowly. No rush. Just another passerby, with nowhere urgent to be. Then slipped inside. The air was cooler. Empty. Or at least, it wanted to feel empty. Footsteps echoed lightly as I moved forward. Not hiding. Not announcing. Balanced. A corridor. Dim lights. Concrete walls. And at the end,
A door.
slightly open. I paused. Listened. Voices.
Low.
Controlled. Conversation. Already in progress. I stepped closer. Not enough to be seen. Just enough to hear. You moved too early, one voice said. Familiar. The external advisor. The same one from the contract. The one who stood beside my grandmother, like he belonged there. Another voice responded.
Calm.
Cold. Correction.
Pause.
She moved exactly when we expected. My breath slowed. Because that wasn't a guess. That was design. She accelerated it, the advisor said. And that changes the risk. A small silence. Then a third voice. One I hadn't heard before. We accounted for variance. Variance. That word again. My grandmother, the CEO. Now them. Everything connected through that single concept. Unpredictability. And the board, the advisor asked. Disposable. No hesitation. No emotion. Just fact. My jaw tightened slightly. Not out of sympathy. Out of clarity. Because now, the hierarchy was visible. The board wasn't power. It was a layer. And layers can be removed. What about her? The advisor continued. A pause. Longer this time. Then the cold voice answered. She's not the problem. Silence. She's the outcome. That sentence hit deeper than anything else. Because it meant I wasn't an interruption. I was expected. Built into the system. Just like she said. Contingency. Then why are we here? The advisor asked. To decide whether she becomes an asset.
Pause.
Or a liability. The air shifted. Because that decision was happening right now. About me. And I was standing just outside the door. Listening. unseen, unaccounted for. Or at least, they thought I was. I didn't step in. Not yet. Because information is always more valuable than presence. Her moves are controlled, the advisor said. She's not reacting emotionally. Of course I wasn't. Emotion is noise. And I had spent too long learning how to remove it. That makes her useful, the third voice added. But also dangerous. A faint shift. Like someone adjusting their position. Can she be guided? The advisor asked.
Guided.
Interesting choice of word. Not directly.
The cold voice again.
She doesn't trust surface influence. I almost smiled. Because they were right. Trust is earned. And I hadn't given it to anyone. Then indirectly, the advisor said, "We've already started." My eyes narrowed slightly. Because that meant the messages, the photo, everything. Not random. Structured.
Designed to move me.
And if she resists, the third voice asked. A pause. This time, long enough to matter. Then the answer came. Then we remove her. Simple.
Clean.
Final. No anger. No hesitation. Just outcome. I stood there, completely still. Because this was the moment most people panic. The moment fear takes over. The moment they make mistakes. But I didn't move. Because fear only has power when it changes your behavior. And mine remained exactly the same.
Calm.
Controlled. Focused. I stepped back quietly. Not retreating. Repositioning. Because walking in now would give them control. And I don't walk into rooms where I'm already defined. Instead, I took out my phone, opened the camera, switched to recording. Then, I stepped forward, pushed the door open.
Slowly.
The conversation stopped instantly. 3 men turned. All different. All calm. All dangerous. But none of them looked surprised. Of course they didn't. Because this was part of the design. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and for a second, no one spoke. Because silence is where power settles. Then I broke it. You should have finished that conversation, I said softly. A pause. I was listening. The advisor smiled slightly. Not nervous. Curious. I know. Of course he did. The third man leaned back in his chair, studying me, evaluating, like I was data, not a person. And the cold voice finally spoke again. You're earlier than expected. I tilted my head slightly. And you're exactly where I thought you'd be. A small shift. Not visible to most.
But I saw it.
Because control is about noticing the smallest changes. You've been guiding me, I said. Looking at all 3. Not accusing. Confirming. The advisor didn't deny it. Correcting your path, he said. I smiled faintly. Same difference. A pause. Then I took a step closer. Now, let's simplify this. My voice stayed calm. Even. You're deciding whether I'm useful, pause, or disposable. No reaction. Because truth doesn't shock people who already know it. So I'll save you time. I placed my phone on the table. Screen still recording. Neither option works for me. The third man's eyes flickered to the phone. Not worried. Interested. You think evidence changes anything? He asked. I shook my head slightly.
No.
A pause. I think timing does. Silence. Because now they understood something. I wasn't here to expose them. Not yet. I was here to shift the game. The cold voice leaned forward slightly. And what exactly are you proposing? I met his gaze.
Steady.
Unshaken. A third option. A longer silence. Because now they were listening. Not evaluating. Listening. I don't become your asset, I said. And you don't try to remove me. A pause. We coexist. The advisor smiled faintly. That's not how this works. I nodded. I know. Another pause. That's why it's new. The room went quiet again. Because innovation is unpredictable, and unpredictability is the only thing systems like theirs can't fully control. But then, the cold voice spoke again. And this time, there was something different in it. Not calm. Not cold. Curious. You're negotiating.
Pause.
Without leverage. I smiled.
Slow. Precise.
Because that was where they were wrong. Not yet, I said quietly. Then I reached into my bag and placed something else on the table. Not a phone. Not a file. A single envelope.
Old. Worn.
And instantly, the advisor's expression changed. For the first time. Because he recognized it. Before anyone else. And that told me everything. You shouldn't have that, he said. His voice, not calm anymore. Not controlled. Real. I didn't respond. I just looked at him. Because now, the balance had shifted. And, for the first time since I walked into that room, I wasn't the one being evaluated. They were. The moment he said it, you shouldn't have that. I knew exactly where to look. Not at the envelope. At him. Because objects don't hold power. Reactions do. And his reaction was the first honest thing I had seen from him.
Fear. Small.
Controlled. But real. I didn't touch the envelope again. Didn't open it. Didn't explain it. Because explanation reduces impact. Instead, I leaned back slightly. Gave them space to think. To calculate. To doubt. You've been very careful, I said softly. Layering everything, isolating risk, controlling outcomes. My eyes stayed on the advisor. But you missed something. A pause.
People.
The third man's expression didn't change. But the cold one shifted his attention slightly. Enough. Because systems can be controlled. But people, they leak. They don't all think like you, I continued. They don't all stay loyal. The advisor's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. There's always one, pause, who chooses self-preservation over structure. Silence. because now they were replaying everything, every conversation, every connection, trying to find the crack. I let it sit, because doubt is more destructive than truth. What is it? The third man asked,
Calm.
but sharper now. I smiled faintly. Insurance. I pushed the envelope forward, slowly,
Not to give it to them.
to let them feel it. The advisor didn't touch it. Of course he didn't, because touching it would make it real. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice wasn't as steady anymore. I tilted my head slightly. You don't believe that? A long silence followed. Because he didn't. Not completely. And partial doubt is enough. To be clear, I said quietly, I'm not here to expose you. A pause. Not yet. The cold voice leaned forward again. Then why are you here? I met his gaze. Because control isn't about destroying systems. Pause. It's about deciding when they change. Another silence. He studied me differently now. Not as a variable, as a factor. You're suggesting alignment, he said. I nodded once. Conditional. The third man leaned back, thinking, because this wasn't standard. This wasn't expected. And that made it dangerous. For someone without leverage, he said slowly, you're negotiating very confidently. I smiled. Confidence doesn't come from leverage. Pause. It comes from understanding timing. I let that sit. Then added. And right now. I glanced briefly at the envelope. Your timing is worse than mine. The advisor finally moved.
Not toward me.
Toward the envelope. His hand hovered above it. Not touching. Testing. Because that's what people do when they don't know if something will hurt them. What's inside? He asked. I didn't answer. Because answers remove imagination. And imagination is far more powerful. The cold voice spoke again. Open it. The advisor hesitated, just for a second. But that second told me everything. He was afraid. Not of me. Of what he might see. And fear means exposure. Slowly, he picked it up. Opened it.
Carefully.
Like it might explode. The room went silent. Not tense. Frozen. Because now, everything depended on what was inside. He pulled out a single document.
Old.
Original. And as his eyes scanned it, his entire posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because the control he had been holding slipped. Just slightly. That's not possible, he whispered. There it was. Confirmation. I didn't ask what he saw. I already knew. Because I had read it. Memorized it. Understood it. You weren't just an advisor, I said softly. You were a failsafe. Silence. The third man leaned forward now. Explain. I looked at him, then back at the advisor. Because this wasn't my truth to reveal. It was his. And forcing someone to expose themselves is always more powerful than doing it for them. The advisor didn't speak. Not immediately. Because now, He was calculating something else. Damage. How much do you know? He asked finally. I smiled faintly. Enough. A pause. More than they do. That landed. Because now, the balance had shifted again. Not between me and them. Between them and each other. And that's where systems break. Internally. You made a side agreement, I continued. Years ago. My voice stayed calm, even with her. I nodded slightly toward the photograph in my mind. My grandmother. The third man's eyes flickered. Because that part, he didn't know. And in that agreement, I added, you weren't just protecting the system. Pause. You were protecting her control over it. Silence. The advisor closed his eyes briefly. Not in defeat. In realization. Because the past had just caught up with him. She knew she couldn't stop it, I said. So, she built you into it. A pause. As a switch. The cold voice shifted. Just slightly. Is this true? He asked. The advisor didn't answer immediately. Which was answer enough? Say it, I said quietly. Not aggressive. Just precise. Because truth, spoken under pressure, is irreversible. He exhaled slowly, then opened his eyes. Yes. One word. But it changed everything. Because now, the system wasn't just layered. It was fractured. And the document, the third man asked, what does it do? I leaned forward slightly. It gives me access. A pause. Not to the agency. I let my eyes move between them, to the structure behind it. Silence. Heavy. Because now, I wasn't just part of the system. I had a way to touch what controlled it. And that was something they couldn't ignore. The cold voice sat back. Thinking. Recalculating. Because now, removing me was no longer simple. It was risky. Very risky. You're not her contingency, he said slowly. I tilted my head. Then what am I? A pause. Long enough to matter. Then he said it. You're her replacement. Silence. But this time, it didn't feel like tension. It felt like alignment. Because something inside me clicked into place. Not emotionally. Structurally. Like a final piece of a puzzle. Locking in. I didn't smile. Didn't react. Because reactions are for people who just realize something. I had been building toward this. Without knowing it. And now, I asked. The room stayed quiet. Because now, the decision wasn't just about me. It was about the future of everything they controlled. And whether they could still control it. The advisor looked at me. Not as a threat. Not as a variable. As something else. Equal. She gets a seat, he said quietly. The third man didn't respond immediately. Because this wasn't his decision alone. But it was close. Very close. And the conditions? The cold voice asked. I met his gaze. Steady. Simple. A pause. We don't destroy each other. My voice didn't change. until it becomes necessary. A long silence followed, because that wasn't peace. It was controlled conflict. And controlled conflict is the most stable form of power. Finally, the third man nodded.
Once.
Small, but enough. Temporary, he said. I nodded back. Everything is. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone. Just redirected. Because now, we weren't enemies. We weren't allies. We were something more dangerous. Interdependent. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, slipped it back into my bag, then turned toward the door. Because staying longer would only reduce the impact. But just before I left, the cold voice spoke again. You should be careful. I paused, not turning. Of what? I asked. A small silence. Then, power doesn't change systems. Pause. It reveals them. I smiled faintly, because that I already knew. I'm counting on that. And I walked out. Because the game hadn't ended. It had evolved. And now, I wasn't just inside it. I was part of what shaped it. But as I stepped into the night, my phone vibrated one last time. A message. Unknown number. Different from before. I opened it. And for the first time, my expression shifted. Not fear. Not shock. Something else. Recognition. Because the message said only one thing. She never wanted you to take her place. Silence filled my mind. Because that changed everything again. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether I could control the system. It was whether I was becoming the very thing she tried to stop. I read the message again. She never wanted you to take her place. No name, no explanation. But it didn't need one. Because whoever sent it knew exactly where to aim. Not at my plan. At my identity. I didn't reply. I didn't even pause. Because doubt only grows when you feed it, and I had spent too long learning how to starve it. Still, I didn't go home. I went somewhere else. The only place that held answers, without distortion. The hospital. Her room was empty now.
Clean.
Neutral. Like she had never been there. But I remembered. Every word, every silence. They took it. Not they ruined me. They took it. I stood there for a long time. Not grieving. Reconstructing. Because something wasn't aligning. Not the system. Not the board. Her. If she never wanted me to take her place, then why build a contingency? Why leave me the letters, the contracts, the structure? Unless taking her place was never the goal. My breath slowed, because that realization cut deeper than everything else. I closed my eyes and replayed everything. Her words, her choices, her silence. Not what she said, what she didn't. And suddenly, it became clear. She didn't build a successor. She built a disruption. Something unpredictable. Something uncontrollable. Something the system couldn't absorb.
Me.
Not to continue it.
To destabilize it.
I opened my eyes slowly, because now the final layer was visible. This was never about reclaiming the agency, never about revenge, not even about control. It was about pressure. Enough pressure to force the system to reveal itself, to expose its hidden connections, its real operators, everything it protected by staying invisible. And I had done exactly that.
Too well.
Because now they weren't watching from a distance. They had stepped forward. They had engaged. They had revealed themselves. Which meant the final move wasn't to join them or fight them directly. It was to make them visible, all at once. I reached into my bag,
Pulled out my phone.
opened the recording from the meeting, their voices, their decisions, their structure. Then another file, the financial trails, the hidden transfers. Then another, the letters, the truth beneath the ink. Everything perfectly aligned. Not to destroy them, to expose them.
Completely.
I didn't hesitate, because hesitation would mean I still wanted control. And I didn't. Not anymore. I uploaded everything. Not to one place. To many. Journalists. Independent networks. Legal watchdogs. Places that didn't answer to a single power. Places that couldn't be silenced all at once. No announcement. No warning. Just release. Because the most powerful moves don't ask for attention. They create it. I locked my phone, placed it down, and waited. Not for long. The first call came within minutes. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then another. And another. Because now, they weren't guiding me. They were reacting. The balance had shifted.
Not to me.
Away from them. And that's all that mattered. By morning, it was everywhere. Not headlines. Not yet. But cracks. Questions.
Doubts.
The kind that spread quietly. Before they explode. I returned to the agency one last time. Walked through the same doors. Same halls. But this time, everything felt different. Not because I owned it. Because it no longer mattered. The CEO was waiting. Of course he was. He looked at me.
Long.
Quiet. You didn't choose control, he said. I shook my head slightly.
No. A pause.
I chose exposure. He exhaled slowly. Not surprised. Almost relieved. She would have approved, he said quietly. I didn't respond. Because approval was never the goal. Understanding was. And you? I asked. What happens to you? He smiled faintly. Same as everyone else in systems like this. A pause. We adapt or we disappear. I nodded. Because that was the only truth that ever mattered. I turned to leave. Not dramatically. Just done. Because my part in this was over. But as I reached the door, he spoke one last time. You realize, he said, you didn't destroy it. I paused. Not turning. I know. A small silence. Then I added, I just made it visible. And that was enough. I walked out, not as the owner, not as the successor, but as something far more dangerous. The disruption. The one variable they couldn't predict. And somewhere in the noise that was about to follow, in the chaos they would try to contain, in the systems they would scramble to rebuild, my grandmother's name would finally separate from their lies. Not because I forced it, but because the truth was now impossible to hide. And for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not victory, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from completion.